A bill to increase charter schools in North Carolina clears an important House vote. Voter ID legislation moves forward, and we discuss ending straight ticket voting in North Carolina. Next.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV.
Hello again, I'm Kelly McCullum. Thanks for watching. We'll begin this week's show by following that bill that would end North Carolina's cap on charter schools. It's Senate legislation, in fact, but it's very close to achieving final State House approval. With it, North Carolinians could see charter schools open in enough numbers to compete with traditional public school campuses. Senate Bill 8, which would lift the cap on how many charter schools can operate throughout North Carolina, passed the second of 3 State House votes Thursday afternoon. House Republican leaders call this bill and this issue one of the most deliberated in recent years.
There was about 6 hours of committee discussion and debate total. About 60 amendments were at least prepared. About 35 offered at one point or another. About a dozen included in the final product.
The bill would allow charter schools that agree to serve at least 50 students, there could be exceptions, have a transportation and a food service plan so that disadvantaged students could participate. Current state law does not require charter schools to bus or provide school lunches. This was a compromise, and despite that nod to Democratic concerns, many Democrats say traditional public schools and school teachers could be demeaned by the unfettered growth of charter schools.
But if we vote this bill as it exists, we sign the death warrant for the traditional public schools of the state of North Carolina. We don't improve public education, we demoralize it.
Debate has also centered on charter schools receiving public school funding, but not having to follow the bureaucratic demands placed on traditional public school campuses.
I have watched my local communities work with charters is that they do it with less money. Yes, they have more flexibility, but they have less money per student than the traditional schools, and they're making great gains.
Maybe so, say opponents of widespread charter school implementation. They say charter schools were designed to test theories that could be applied to traditional public schools, but not compete against the system. They say lawmakers don't know what will happen if no charter school cap exists.
If you just raised the cap today, you'd have 80% of us voting for it. But you're putting so many moving parts in here that we're scared it's going to hurt public education in doing so.
A third and final procedural vote on the charter school bill is scheduled for this Monday night in the State House. Staying in the House, they are moving a Senate-backed bill to consolidate educational loan programs where college students can work off their college debt. If you're a college student who agreed to work in a career field suffering severe personnel shortages, your debt could be slowly forgiven. Nursing and teaching students could benefit especially. Now, if a student who signs up for loan forgiveness doesn't meet the work obligations, they'd simply pay off their loan debt. Governor Perdue and Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger traded rhetoric late this week on job creation and boosting the economy. Both told reporters their ideas are the best answer to North Carolina's struggles, and both questioned the other's strategies. Senate President Pro Tem Phil Berger says his GOP team is changing the economic climate in North Carolina. He told reporters one bill can't bring thousands of new jobs, but changing the way North Carolina does business and controlling state spending can spur growth.
What you've got to do is fundamentally change the way government operates in North Carolina, fundamentally change the interaction between government and the private sector.
Minutes after Senator Berger's comments, Governor Perdue told legislative Republicans the exuberance of claiming political power should be focused on jobs, education, and little else.
And I know what it's like to come to town with a whole pocket full of ideas. I've been there and done that, where you come and you say, it's my turn, I'm going to change the world.
Senator Phil Berger says the GOP's job this session is reforming policies established through years of Democratic Party rule in North Carolina.
The policies that Governor Perdue and the Democrats have followed are the reason that this recession has been as bad as it has been, and the reason that the private sector has shed as many jobs that it has shed.
Governor Perdue countered the Republicans are not making jobs and education the exclusive priority. She noted some bills that have been filed and said she's happy to debate them once the economy improves.
We could argue over checking stations and whether we need our own money system or where I should put my campaign signs. I mean, I'll be glad to do all that, and I'll be glad to show you a lot of other things.
But Senator Berger says any lawmaker can file any bill, so non-jobs bills being filed does not reflect a lack of focus. He says expect a GOP jobs bill soon, as his team has been working in Raleigh, not making public appearances. The governor says focus.
We've not gone around the state holding press conferences saying that we're on a jobs tour.
Every time we lose focus from jobs and education, we're actually losing focus on the future of this state.
Gary Robertson with the Associated Press joins us now. You were at both press conferences for Senator Berger and Governor Perdue. What do you make of that, what was said?
Well, I think it's kind of a foretelling of what the budget negotiations may look like, maybe what the 2012 campaign looks like. Both of them saying, you know, we're the ones, either the Republicans or Perdue, the Democrat, we're the ones that are creating jobs. We're the ones that are cleaning up from the recession, trying to make things better for all North Carolinians. It seems as though that Senator Berger is trying to promote the Republicans that, you know, we're fiscally sound, and it's the Democrats and Perdue's problem for causing at least exacerbating the recession, and Governor Perdue coming in and saying, no, I'm doing the best that I can, and it's the Republicans that aren't focused on jobs and education like I am.
What do you make of the idea the GOP is not focused? I've seen this tweeted, it's on Facebook, emails. Is that the Democratic effort to brand the GOP based on the bills you see filed down here?
Well, I think many Democrats want to somehow brand Republicans as extreme because they are, you know, it's 170 members in the legislature, and 100 of them roughly are Republicans. They're all going to have different ideas, and not all of them are going to be about jobs and education. And of course, you know, a legislature can multitask, but you know, the fact that the budget process takes a long time, it's easy for the other side to say, oh, you're not doing X, Y, and Z. You don't have a jobs bill, and you don't have a budget. So I think it's an easy opportunity for Democrats to be critical of Republicans.
Has there ever been a point in your experience down here where the legislature, or at least the majority party, would stop all business except for a focused issue and target only that, with everything else to the wayside?
Usually the only time that really happens is during special sessions, when there's a particular topic that they're coming for, and only, you know, either it's a veto override or it's for the, you know, there was the Dell incentives back in, I believe, 2004. You know, the Democrats were able to multitask as well, and, you know, they took some time on their budget too. So, I mean, I think what the Republicans are doing is pretty much par for the course.
As you and I make our money by sitting in these committees and following the endless bills that come through here, if you're the average North Carolinian and you want to look at a bill or some work of this body and say, okay, that's going to be the jobs bill, and I can craft what I think is going to happen based on that, would you look to the budget or other forms of legislation?
I think it's generally been the budget. I mean, the budget is kind of the catch-all where the major policies as it relates to taxes and expenses are done. Now, I would say that Republicans are less likely to be involved in or being interested in targeted incentives. So I think if you came down here in a Democratic administration, maybe you would look at some of these jobs bills. But I think many of the things Republicans want to do will be in the budget.
Gary, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
The House has approved the cancellation of state employees' retirement benefits if a state worker commits a felony in line with their job duties. Convicted felon state employees would receive back their contributions plus interest from the system, but no lifetime retirement check. Some lawmakers believe ending retirement in these cases will ultimately punish innocent family members.
Even though the person has been convicted of a felony, it may be their first such mistake or error, particularly for our local government employees, to then impoverish their family and children for their whole retirement, the employer portion of their retirement contribution seems to be an extreme consequence.
They're in that position representing the taxpayers, and because of that, they shouldn't be committing felonies. And I think this is another example of ways, tools that we can use to make sure that when they're working for the general public, that they behave themselves.
This bill sits in the Senate. A Senate Judiciary Committee is discussing a bill to create a loser pays the attorney's fees. In business-to-business lawsuits, Senator Dan Clodfelter says small businesses can go bankrupt fighting never-ending litigation against a larger adversary. He says his bill will give the small guy a chance to win, or at least have both sides of a potential lawsuit consider other options than a court trial.
If you've got financial incentives and you have to judge your risk of winning or losing against the costs of winning and losing, then you make a different calculus. I bet you more cases will mediate and settle than even do now.
This bill still sits in committee. Last week, it appeared the House voter ID bill would not contain the requirement that voters show a photo ID at the polls. This week, the photo ID provision was in the bill, with a slight change bill sponsors say will help people who don't have valid photo ID. Opponents say that's not enough. 1 million voters could be prevented from voting. Here's the story. The House Election Laws Committee approved legislation to require voters to show photo identification at the polling place. Bill supporters say confirming a voter's identity just makes sense in this era.
I am of the opinion that having a requirement to show a photo identification is a very balanced and prudent manner. In our society, we require a photo identity to do many, many things, and I could list them all day long, and we all know what they are. Everything from writing a check to getting into a building and so forth. We all know that most citizens have photo identification, and we've provided in this bill the ability to get that should they not.
The voter ID legislation was modified to allow the use of expired photo IDs. The state would also issue a free photographic voter ID card to any voter without other identification. Some Democrats say that's not enough and that senior citizens will struggle to cast a ballot.
I don't think anyone has implied this bill having color attached to it, because I think it's going to affect seniors, black, white, gray, whatever color.
This is a bill where I haven't seen yet anybody prove to me that there has been any type of fraud other than the little bit that's been reported in this state. We have been getting along well without any type of photo ID.
Once operational, the voter ID bill sponsors say implementing the election law changes will cost about $375,000 per year, with the state and local boards of election, as well as the Division of Motor Vehicles, most affected. The bill sits in the House Appropriations Committee. The Senate is considering new measures to fight Medicaid fraud. New Medicaid cards featuring biometric data could be the answer, but the state wants to study this idea first. Local offices would receive fingerprint scanners and card readers. Medicaid clients would receive that more secure card for a 12-month trial. Test results would be due by July of 2012. A Senate Judiciary Committee began discussing an idea to end straight party voting in North Carolina. The questions surround whether straight party voting is a voter convenience or whether voters simply punch the top of their ballot and ignore the less well-known races down ballot. A Senate Judiciary Committee is just talking about a proposal that would end straight party voting on North Carolina election ballots. Committee members of both parties say there are still many questions that need answering.
I wonder why the presidential ticket is voted on separately, regardless of whether you wanted to vote the rest of the ballot straight ticket or not. So I think that's interesting. I would love to know what the reason is behind that before we go forward.
Some Republican senators who are generally supportive of this legislation do want the answer to that presidential question. On the Democratic side, they say the straight party ticket option makes voting easier, and many voters are comforted by a candidate's party affiliation, especially if they don't know the candidate.
I think that our primary objective should be do whatever is easiest for voters. The whole thing about democracy is that voters participate and it works for them. And straight party voting is just convenient for people.
Another point of conversation is if voters can be confused by straight party voting and if making voters select each individual race on their ballot is a more straightforward option.
It makes the ballot access a little bit easier for people to understand. Instead of voting for the president separate, going through voting straight party down the ticket until you get to judicial races and soil and water, this makes it easier. You just vote on each office that you want to.
Senate Judiciary Committee leaders say these talks will continue into whether the time has passed for straight party voting in North Carolina. Senator Buck Newton wrote this bill to end straight party ticket voting. First of all, welcome to the show. It's your first time on.
I'm very glad to be here. Thank you for it.
What gave you the idea? Why do you think it's needed right now?
Well, honestly, it just seemed like a good common sense thing to do. You know, straight party voting really hurts in some ways, I think, the whole process. It focuses on the parties instead of the candidates and the qualities of the candidates themselves. And that's really why I did it. I think straight party voting really hurts viable third-party candidates.
But why would you want that? You're a Republican.
Well, I think people should be voting for the person. You know, I'm from Eastern North Carolina. I'm a Republican, but I'm from Eastern North Carolina. You know, Eastern North Carolina has a lot of Democrat roots, and you know, we were always looking for who's the best candidate and not wanting to vote for whoever was the party guy.
What has been the initial reaction from your GOP colleagues?
Very supportive. I think philosophically they feel generally the same way, that people ought to be voting for the best candidate, and sometimes the best candidate is not the candidate from the party that you prefer, whether that be Democrat or Republican or some other party. And straight party voting tends to get people just focused on which party's up and which party's down, and you know, we need to get away from that. We have a lot of problems we need to solve that party labels alone will not do that.
Sounds like you're asking voters out there to engage in the candidates, to learn more about them and not assume the brand is the best candidate.
In every election, especially presidential elections, you have a lot of down ticket races that are really important. I mean, you know, what we do up here in Raleigh is very important. And a lot of folks back home are focusing maybe on what's going on in Washington, D.C. and not paying attention to the bills that are running up here. And they need to know who it is that they're going to send up there and how they're going to approach these bills and what they're going to do.
Have you hit any philosophical brick walls where people say, you know, I'm a lifelong Democrat or I'm a lifelong Republican, and there's no way I'm going to take a chance on crossing that party line?
You know, they can still do that. I mean, this bill would not change the fact that party labels will still be beside each of the candidates' names. So they'll know if the party matters to them, they'll still be able to find the candidate that they want to vote for if that's what's going to decide it. But the other thing I want to point out is that I think that I think it's well documented that straight party voting, for example, hurts the judicial candidates. Judicial candidates are not elected according to their party, and so when you do the straight vote, you don't vote for any of the judicial candidates. So, you know, sometimes people forget.
Senator Buck Newton, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure. Appreciate it.
The run and you're done felony speeding bill keeps moving through the House this week. The proposal would add punishments to drivers who engage in high-speed police chases. These drivers can see a felony speeding added to the charges they'd already face when they're caught. The result could be the suspect forfeiting his or her vehicle. Republican Representative Edgar Starnes wants employers to face some limits on when they can demand access to a worker's driver's license. Employers could not make copies of a worker's driver's license for company files unless the state law or a work contract requires it. Companies then could only ask for an employee's license during business hours and for a brief period of time. The proposed law would take effect immediately. The bill to cost drivers who drive with revoked driver's licenses their vehicles moves through committee this week as well. Drivers would get 3 strikes or driving with license revoked convictions before receiving either mandatory jail time or probation with house arrest. A 4th conviction would cause the driver to lose their vehicle. Fines could reach $2,500 with those multiple convictions. The House Transportation Committee resumed debate over making the State Department of Transportation ask legislative permission before seeking federal high-speed railroad funding. Some House Republicans say lawmakers should have a say before the DOT signs any deals, and that's the bone of contention. The House Transportation Committee spent a second week debating legislation to prevent North Carolina's Department of Transportation from seeking federal high-speed rail grant money unless the General Assembly votes to approve it. Representative Philip Fry says people are taking this proposal out of context and saying the bill opposes high-speed rail investment.
It is nothing about receiving or not receiving these monies. It is a fact that we have to sign off on it as a General Assembly and say, yeah, this is good for our taxpayers, or this is not good. This is where the buck stops.
House Bill 422 sponsors say the DOT should not have automatic authority to seek grants and build infrastructure when it's the General Assembly and state taxpayers who must pay the long-term maintenance costs of such a project. In this case, it's railroad upgrades.
It's fiscal concern, but it's also oversight. That was what we discussed today, and I think it's very imperative and it's very appropriate for the General Assembly to weigh in any time that a state agency is going to incur a future financial liability.
But State Transportation Secretary Gene Conti says the DOT has long been preparing financially for maintaining an upgraded railroad system between Charlotte and the coast.
Our request for the maintenance of these tracks are in our budget and have been since we submitted it, have been every year since we started this program almost 20 years ago under Governor Martin. This has been a bipartisan effort all the way through.
Charlotte area officials spoke against limiting the DOT's ability to seek federal high-speed rail money. They say making the state wait for lawmakers' support will place North Carolina behind the curve on high-tech investment. But supporters of DOT limits say rail funding is a statewide taxpayer issue in the long term, so state lawmakers should weigh the investment's value first. This bill remains in the House Transportation Committee. House legislation would protect motorcycle drivers and riders from aggressive car drivers. Car and truck drivers, you could face misdemeanor charges for forcing a motorcycle to change lanes. A higher misdemeanor charge would apply to vehicle drivers whose actions behind the wheel cause a motorcycle wreck that leads to damage and injuries. Fines would be $200 or $500 depending on the situation. This law would take effect December 1st. The bill sits in the Senate. Republican Senator Don East wants to end traffic light camera system use throughout North Carolina. These are the systems that catch us running red traffic lights by photographing our license plates and sending us a ticket in the mail. Senator East says traffic camera money is supposed to support a local school system, but there have been some arguments between city governments and school boards over that revenue. It's time to stop it.
I just think we got a mixed bag of stuff here that has to do with red light cameras. I have voted against every red light camera bill I've ever seen, and I just feel like it's time that we bring this practice to a halt.
The bill has passed 2 of 3 Senate procedural votes. House Majority Leader Paul Stam brought his eminent domain bill to a House Judiciary Committee this week. He says it's his 5th attempt to let state voters choose if they want constitutional protections against some forms of eminent domain. The main target is eminent domain procedures where private property is seized by the government and then sold to a private developer for tax revenue purposes. But some Democrats want to explore the idea more deeply. They're worried about unintended consequences.
This bill says private property shall not be taken by eminent domain except for a public use. That's what we all thought it meant for hundreds of years. What is a public use? Roads, courthouses, sewer, water. It's also public utilities, even though they are owned by a private entity, because a utility is, by definition, something to which the public has a right to use.
Since we're changing North Carolina law and we're going to make it more restrictive, what else is not going to happen? That's what I want to know. I want those facts.
State voters would decide the amendment's fate on Election Day 2012. The House considered a possible state constitutional amendment bill to limit future House speakers and Senate presidents pro tem to 2 two-year terms. Most lawmakers in the House agree with term limits for these leadership posts, but wonder if changing the state constitution is the best method of enforcing term limits. The full House, by the necessary 3/5 majority, approved giving North Carolina voters the choice of placing term limits on future House speakers and Senate presidents pro tem. Term limits on these 2 powerful political positions carries bipartisan support. The need for a voter-approved constitutional amendment, that's another matter.
I don't know how to make the case any more effectively. It truly is, the case law shows, not effective other than as a constitutional amendment. This is not a huge amendment. It's not long. It's just 34 words, and it will correct a lot of some of the problems we've seen in this institution.
Most House Democrats lodged complaints about changing the state constitution, especially when lawmakers can pass state laws that apply to the House and Senate.
I feel like we need to be reserved in acting hastily about amending the Constitution. I think we can arrive at the very means we're trying to achieve without a constitutional amendment, simply by having this placed in statute.
While some Democratic crossover support was necessary to move the term limits bill in the House, the GOP carries a supermajority in the Senate. A basic party line vote will place term limits options before North Carolina voters. Governor Perdue cannot veto constitutional amendment legislation. Look us up on the internet this weekend if you get a chance. We check our boards daily, especially our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/Legweek. You can watch this entire show online at unctv.org/Legweek. And if something's on your mind, send the team here an email if you have a question. Our email address is legweek@unctv.org. That's our show for this week. We hope to see you next time.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting UNC-TV.